Everyone ignored the Vampire King's autistic daughter, until she asked me to dance with her. Nightborne Castle rose from the valley like a crown of blackened thorns, its spires clawing at the twilight sky. A fortress carved from onyx and ancient stone, wrapped in ivy that whispered secrets to the moon. Inside, the grand ballroom shimmered beneath a constellation of crystal chandeliers, each one ablaze with 1,000 candles that cast shadows long and hungry across marble floors. It was the night of the Crimson Court, an annual gathering where vampire nobles came to feast, to flatter, and to forget their immortal emptiness. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Leora Vale smoothed the front of her simple black uniform, her fingers trembling slightly as she tucked a stray curl of auburn hair behind her ear. First night in service, the headmistress had warned her. Keep your head down, speak only when spoken to, and whatever you do not approach the princess. Nothing could have prepared her for this. The cold elegance, the predatory grace of creatures who moved like silk and smiled like knives. She wove through the crowd with a silver tray of goblets filled with wine dark as blood, her human heartbeat a drum among the stillness of the undead. There was a scent of night-blooming jasmine in the air, sweet and cloying. But beneath it, something colder, something forgotten. Then she saw her. In the far corner of the ballroom, nearly swallowed by the velvet drapes and flickering shadows, a small figure sat perfectly still. Her crimson dress, rich as rose petals, delicate as spider silk, pooled around her like spilled wine. A cascade of pale blonde hair framed a face almost translucent in its fragility. Her slender fingers turned a silver pendant over and over, the rhythmic motion hypnotic, endless. Her eyes never lifted. Not to the swirling dancers, not to the haunting violin melody, not to the courtiers who glided past in their jeweled finery. No one else looked at her. Not once. Leora's brow furrowed. She glanced around the ballroom. Servants swept by without pause. Nobles twirled and laughed as though the child didn't exist. She leaned toward an older maid refilling crystal decanters. "Excuse me," Leora whispered. "Who is that little girl?" The woman's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a warning hiss. "Princess Eveline, the king's daughter. Don't go near her, she doesn't speak. She doesn't like to be touched. She's different." Leora said nothing, but her chest tightened. She returned to her duties, but her gaze kept drifting back to that shadowed corner, to the princess, to the cruel silence that surrounded her like a cage. When the music swelled, a waltz both mournful and beautiful, the courtiers swept onto the dance floor in a choreographed wave of black velvet and crimson silk. Leora paused at the edge of the crowd, her tray now empty. Princess Eveline hadn't moved. Still turning that pendant, still untouched, still alone, Leora set the tray down with barely a sound. With careful steps, she crossed the ballroom floor, her shoes a soft whisper against polished marble. The air grew colder as she approached the princess, as though even the warmth of candlelight dared not reach her. Leora crouched slowly, mindful not to startle the child, and kept her voice gentle. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Leora," no response. Just the faint click of the pendant spinning in pale fingers. Leora waited. Then slowly she extended her hand. Not to grab, not to force, but simply to offer. "Would you like to try dancing with me?" For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the pendant stopped turning. Princess Eveline's violet eyes lifted, distant, haunted, but achingly aware. Her fingers hovered, trembling like moth wings, and then barely, carefully touched Leora's palm. Leora stood, cradling the small hand as if it were made of moonlight. She guided Eveline toward the edge of the dance floor, far from the crowd, but close enough for the music to find them. She began to sway, just a gentle rocking motion, leading without pressure, moving to the rhythm of a heartbeat, rather than the violin. Eveline stood rigid at first, her body tense as drawn wire, but with the next measure her foot shifted, one hesitant step, then another. A fragile rhythm formed between them, and the ballroom stilled. Not the music, not the movement, but everything else. Conversations fell away like dropped masks. Goblets paused at lips. Even the violinists seemed to soften their strings, as though afraid to break whatever spell had just been woven. At the edge of the crowd stood a figure in midnight black velvet, his silhouette sharp as a blade against the golden light. Darius Nightborne, Vampire King, widower, father. His crimson eyes burned like dying stars, locked on the impossible sight before him. His daughter, who hadn't allowed anyone near her in 7 years, holding hands with a mortal stranger and dancing. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. His face remained carved from stone, but something flickered beneath, grief, wonder, terror all at once, across the marble floor. The girl in crimson turned beneath Leora's steady hand, her movements stiff but trying, reaching toward something she'd been denied for too long. And for the first time in years, Princess Eveline smiled, faint, fleeting, real. The music carried on, but another melody, quieter, more fragile, had begun to rise. A language of rhythm and trust, woven into the space between mortal and immortal, silence and song. Where loneliness had lived for too long, something had just stepped in, something like hope. The feast continued late into the night, but the ballroom would never feel quite the same. As the nobles finally departed and the candles burned low, Leora remained, unaware that she had just shattered a curse 7 years in the making, or that the vampire king now watched her from the shadows, his heart beating for the first time in centuries. But Leora didn't know the weight of what she'd done. She didn't know that the last person to dance with Princess Eveline had been her mother, Queen Isolde, on the night she died. She didn't know that Darius Nightborn had sworn the ballroom would remain silent until his grief allowed otherwise. And she didn't know that the child's difference was not a curse, but a gift powerful enough to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead. All she knew was that when she returned to the servants' quarters that night, she could still feel the small hand in hers, and somewhere deep in the castle, she could have sworn she heard the faint echo of a lullaby no one had sung in 7 years. The morning after the Crimson Court gathering arrived wrapped in mist, the kind that clung to the castle's stone walls like cold breath. Leora woke to the sound of ravens calling from the parapets, her small room in the servants' wing still dark, despite the gray dawn bleeding through the narrow window. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Princess Eveline's face, that fragile, fleeting smile. And behind it, like a shadow-given form, the vampire king's burning gaze. By the time she descended to the kitchens, the other servants were already whispering, "Can't believe she touched her. King didn't even punish her. Just stood there like, 7 years, and no one's gotten that close." The conversations died the moment Leora entered. Eyes followed her as she tied her apron, filled her basin with water, and gathered her cleaning rags. No one spoke to her directly, but the weight of their judgment pressed against her skin like frost. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Marin with silver streaks in her dark hair, finally approached. Her voice was low, clipped. "You're assigned to the East Wing today. Polish the banisters, dust the portraits, and keep your hands to yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "The king has not summoned you. Consider that a mercy." Leora nodded, swallowing the questions that burned in her throat. She spent the morning in silence, her cloth moving in rhythmic circles across centuries-old wood. The portraits stared down at her, pale faces with sharp cheekbones and eyes like frozen lakes. Vampire nobility, their beauty preserved forever, their expressions eternally remote. But it was the largest portrait that made her pause. It hung at the top of the grand staircase, bathed in a shaft of dim light from the stained glass window above, a woman with honey-gold hair and warm brown eyes, her smile gentle and knowing. She wore a gown of pale blue, and in her hands she held a single white rose. The plaque beneath read, "Queen Isolde Nightborn, beloved, eternal." She was human. Leora startled, turning to find an older servant, a man with graying temples and kind eyes, standing beside her with a bundle of linens. "The queen," he continued softly, his gaze on the portrait. "A mortal woman who won the heart of an immortal king. They say he would have given up his throne for her." His voice grew quieter. "Then she died bringing Princess Eveline into the world. Childbirth is always a risk for humans, but the mixing of mortal and vampire blood..." He shook his head. "The king has never forgiven himself." Leora's chest tightened. "And the princess?" The man's expression grew sad. "She has her mother's face. Every time the king looks at her, he sees what he lost. Some say that's why he can't bear to be near her. Others say..." He hesitated. "Say what?" Leora pressed. "That the ballroom is cursed. That Queen Isolde sang a lullaby to her unborn child the night she died, and the song still lingers in those halls. The king forbade music, forbade dancing. He said the ballroom would remain silent until his grief allowed otherwise." The servant glanced at Leora, his eyes knowing. "You broke 7 years of that silence last night." Before Leora could respond, he walked away, leaving her alone with the portrait and the weight of understanding. That evening, as twilight bled across the sky, Leora was summoned to the ballroom. She entered through the servant's door, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. The chandeliers hung dark overhead, their crystals dull without candlelight. The marble floor stretched before her like a frozen lake, and at its center stood the vampire king. Darius Nightborn was even more imposing up close. Tall and leanly muscled, his presence seemed to devour the light around him. His hair, pale as moonlight, fell past his shoulders, and his face could have been carved by a sculptor obsessed with beauty and cruelty in equal measure. but it was his eyes that held her, crimson and ancient, burning with something that looked like barely restrained anguish. Princess Eveline stood beside him, small and still, her hand clutched in his. "You are the maid from last night." His voice was low, smooth as velvet over steel. "Yes, Your Majesty." Leora curtsied, her heart hammering. "Do you understand what you did?" She lifted her gaze carefully. "I danced with the princess, my lord." "You defied an order." His jaw tightened. "You approached her without permission." "You touched her." "She asked me to," Leora said quietly. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. His grip on Eveline's hand tightened, and the child flinched slightly. He released her immediately, his face hardening into stone once more. "She doesn't know what she wants. She doesn't understand." He stopped himself, his voice fracturing. When he spoke again, it was colder. "Leave her. She doesn't need your pity. It's not a pity, Your Majesty." His eyes snapped to hers. "Dangerous." "Then what is it?" "Kindness," Leora said simply. "She's a child, and she's lonely." For a moment the king said nothing. The silence stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Then he turned away, his cloak sweeping behind him like wings. "You are dismissed. Do not approach the princess again." He walked toward the shadows, Eveline's hand slipping from his as he moved. The child stood frozen, her violet eyes following her father's retreating form, her fingers twisting that silver pendant once more. Leora wanted to go to her, to offer comfort. But the king's command hung in the air like a blade, and she knew better than to push further. Not yet. That night, Leora lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams. Sleep eluded her, her mind replaying the king's words, the pain buried beneath his coldness, the way Eveline had stood so utterly alone. Then she heard it, faint, distant, a melody drifting through the stone walls, a lullaby. Leora sat up, her breath catching. The sound was impossibly soft, like a memory-given voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A woman's voice, achingly tender, singing words in a language Leora didn't recognize, but somehow understood. "Sleep, little star. Dream beneath the moon. Mother's love will find you," wrapped in a silver tune. The song wound through the castle like smoke, beautiful and haunting and wrong, because no one was singing it. Leora rose, her bare feet cold against the floor, and pressed her ear to the door. The lullaby continued, growing neither louder nor softer, as though it existed just beyond the edge of reality. And somewhere deep in the castle, she could have sworn she heard a child weeping. Princess Eveline. Leora's hand went to the doorknob, hesitating. The king had forbidden her from approaching the princess, but that sound, that grief wrapped in ghostly song, pulled at something deep in her chest. She opened the door and stepped into the darkened hallway, following the impossible music toward whatever haunted Nightborn castle, toward the ghosts that refused to rest. The lullaby led Leora through corridors she'd never walked before, deeper into the castle's heart where torchlight flickered against stone like dying heartbeats. The melody wove through the darkness, always just ahead, always just out of reach. When she finally turned a corner near the princess's wing, the song stopped. Silence rushed back in like water filling a void. Leora stood in the hallway breathless, her nightgown pale against the shadows. Ahead, a sliver of golden light spilled from beneath a door, the princess's chamber. She approached quietly, pressed her ear to the wood, and heard it. Soft, hitching breaths. The sound of a child trying not to cry. Without thinking, Leora knocked. 3 gentle taps. The crying stopped. "Princess Eveline?" Leora whispered. "It's Leora, may I come in?" A pause. Then so quietly she almost missed it. "Yes." Leora eased the door open. The room beyond was surprisingly simple for royalty. A canopy bed draped in silver silk, a small writing desk, shelves lined with untouched books. But what caught her attention was the floor. Dozens of candle wax drippings, carefully collected, sorted by color, arranged in perfect spirals across the rug. White, cream, pale gold, each one placed with meticulous precision, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Princess Eveline sat in the center of it all, still wearing her crimson dress from earlier, her pale hair loose around her shoulders. Her violet eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "You heard it too," the princess said softly. "Mother's song." Leora knelt at the edge of the wax spirals, careful not to disturb them. "I heard something beautiful. She sings when I'm alone." Eveline's fingers traced the patterns absently. "Father says I'm imagining it. That grief makes us hear things that aren't there." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But I'm not imagining you." Something in Leora's chest cracked open. "No, you're not." That was how it began. Over the following days, Leora found reasons to pass by the princess's wing, delivering linens, polishing silver in nearby corridors, tending candles that didn't need tending. Each time she would pause at Eveline's door, knock 3 times, and wait for that soft yes before entering. She didn't announce her intentions or ask permission from the king. Some acts of rebellion are quiet. At first, they simply sat together. Leora watched as Eveline collected wax drippings from the chamber sticks, her movements methodical and soothing. The princess would arrange them in spirals, mandalas, sometimes intricate labyrinths that seemed to map some internal landscape only she could see. "They help," Eveline explained one afternoon, her voice barely above a murmur. "When everything feels too loud, too bright, too much, I make patterns. Then the world makes sense again." Leora nodded, understanding blooming in her chest. "May I try?" Eveline hesitated, then pushed a small pile of cream-colored wax toward her. Together they worked in comfortable silence, creating order from chaos. Slowly, tentatively, Leora began to teach her small things, how to hold a teacup, without her hands trembling, wrapping both palms around it for warmth and weight, how to curtsy when the motion felt overwhelming. A small nod could carry the same respect. How to breathe when panic clawed at her throat. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Like waves against a shore, Eveline absorbed each lesson not through words, but through motion. She would watch Leora's hands, mirror the gestures, practice until her body remembered what her mind couldn't always hold. She never spoke more than necessary, but her eyes, those haunting violet eyes, grew brighter each day. It was during their 5th evening together that Darius Nightborn found them. Leora had been humming while helping. Eveline arranged her newest collection. This time, spirals within spirals, like galaxies. The tune was something her mother used to sing, a simple folk melody about stars and sailors finding their way home. She didn't hear the door open, didn't sense the king's presence until his voice cut through the air like winter wind. "What are you doing?" Leora's hand still. She turned slowly to find Darius standing in the doorway, his crimson eyes blazing, his frame rigid with barely contained fury. He filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his presence suffocating. "Your Majesty, I gave you an order." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You were to leave her alone." Leora stood, placing herself between the king and his daughter, a foolish, instinctive thing. She needed, "You presume to know what my daughter needs?" His power rolled off him in waves, making the candles flicker. "You, a mortal servant who's been here less than a fortnight?" "Father, don't." The words were so soft Leora almost missed them. But Darius heard. His entire body went still. Eveline had risen, her small hand resting gently on Leora's arm. Not gripping, not pulling, just resting, grounding. Her gaze remained on her father, calm and unwavering. "She's kind to me," Eveline said quietly. "Please don't send her away." For a long moment, no one moved. Darius stared at his daughter as though seeing her for the first time, or perhaps remembering someone else who'd once stood just like that, brave and gentle in equal measure. His jaw worked. His hands curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. "You tread on graves you cannot see, girl. My daughter is not a project for your conscience. She is not—" He stopped himself, something breaking in his expression. "She is all I have left of her mother, and I will not watch her be hurt again." "I would never hurt her," Leora said firmly. "Everyone hurts her," Darius replied, his voice hollow. "By existing, by touching, by trying to make her into something she's not." He looked at Eveline, and for just a moment, Leora saw the grief laid bare, a father drowning in love and terror. "I am trying to protect her. From what?" Leora asked softly. "From connection? From joy? From hope," he said. "Hope is the cruelest thing we can give the damned." He turned then, his cloak sweeping behind him, but he paused in the doorway. Without looking back, he spoke one last time. "Do as you will. But when she is hurt again, and she will be, do not say I didn't warn you." Then he was gone, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and the scent of cold stone. Eveline's hand remained on Leora's arm. They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the quiet settle back over the room. Then, so softly it was almost imagined, Leora began to hum again. The same melody, stars and sailors and finding the way home. And this time, Eveline hummed along. It was fragile, barely there, just a whisper of sound threading through Leora's tune. But it was real. It was hers. When the song ended, Eveline looked up at Leora with something like wonder in her eyes. "Again?" she whispered. Leora smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Again, and in the candlelit chamber, surrounded by spirals of wax and patterns only they could understand, 2 souls found a language that needed no words, only rhythm, only trust, only the courage to sing in the dark." The castle changed in subtle ways over the following week. Leora noticed it in small things, The way servants whispered less when she passed. How the head housekeeper no longer assigned her to the farthest wings. The soft sound of humming that sometimes drifted from the princess's chambers when she walked by. Eveline was blooming, carefully and quietly, like a night flower finally given permission to open. But the vampire king remained a shadow at the edges of it all, present but distant, watching but never approaching. Leora caught glimpses of him in corridors, his crimson eyes following her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger anymore, something rawer, something like longing wrapped in barbed wire. It was on the 8th night, while carrying fresh linens through the darkened halls, that Leora heard his voice. She'd been passing the throne room, a vast chamber she'd only glimpsed once during her initial tour. The doors stood slightly ajar, and candlelight spilled through the gap like liquid gold. She should have kept walking, should have respected his privacy, but the sound of his voice, broken, achingly human despite his immortality, stopped her cold. She had your eyes, Isolde, your warmth, your gentle heart. Leora pressed herself against the wall beside the door, barely breathing, and now she has your silence. His voice cracked. She won't speak to me. She flinches when I reach for her. She builds walls from wax and arranges them like graves, and I don't know how to reach her. A long pause. Then softer, is this my punishment? For loving you? For binding myself to something mortal and fragile? I gave you everything, my crown, my court, my immortal soul, and when you left, you took her with you. The daughter I touch is only a shell. The real Eveline died with you that night. Leora's chest tightened, her eyes burning. She risked a glance through the gap in the door. Darius stood before an enormous portrait, the same woman from the grand staircase, but here she glowed with life. Queen Isolde, captured mid-laugh, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her eyes bright with joy and love. The king's hand was pressed flat against the canvas, over her painted heart, as though he could somehow reach through and pull her back. I failed you, he whispered, and now I'm failing her. Every day I see you slipping further from her eyes, and I don't know how to... His voice broke entirely. I don't know how to be what she needs. Leora's hand went to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. This wasn't cruelty. This was a man drowning in grief, mistaking distance for protection, silence for safety. Before she could retreat, his head snapped toward the door. I know you're there. Leora's heart stopped. She stepped into the doorway, her hands clasped before her, meeting his burning gaze. Forgive me, your majesty. I didn't mean to intrude, and yet you did. He turned fully to face her, and she saw the tear tracks on his pale cheeks, silver against marble. Tell me, girl, do you make a habit of eavesdropping on your king's private despair? Only when that despair is built on a lie, Leora said quietly. His eyes flashed dangerous. Choose your next words carefully. Your daughter is not broken. Leora stepped forward, emboldened by the truth burning in her chest. She's not a shell or a curse or punishment for anything. Her mind works differently than yours or mine, yes, but differently doesn't mean damaged. It means gifted. Gifted? Darius laughed bitter and hollow. She cannot bear to be touched. She cannot speak more than a handful of words without retreating into herself. She spends her days arranging wax like a madwoman. Like an artist, Leora interrupted. Like someone who sees patterns in chaos that we can't perceive. Your Majesty, she's not retreating from the world. She's trying to make sense of it in the only way she knows how. You've known her for a week, he said coldly. I've watched her for 7 years. Don't presume to tell me about my own daughter. Then why don't you ask her? Leora challenged. Why don't you sit with her, watch what she creates, and listen when she hums? She's trying to show you who she is, but you're too busy mourning who you think she should be. The air between them crackled with tension. For a moment, Leora thought he might strike her, or worse, banish her from the castle entirely. Instead, he turned away, his shoulders rigid. You know nothing of what I've lost. Nothing of the weight I carry. His voice was quiet, lethal. Leave me, now. Leora hesitated, then curtsied and retreated, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found Eveline in her chamber the next afternoon, seated at her small desk with parchment spread before her. The princess's hand moved in quick, precise strokes, charcoal smudging her pale fingers. What are you drawing? Leora asked softly, kneeling beside her. Eveline didn't look up, but she turned the parchment so Leora could see. Strange shapes covered the page. Spirals, curves, intersecting lines that seemed random at first. But as Leora studied them, something shifted. The shapes began to pulse with rhythm, each curve corresponding to a note, each spiral a measure of music. It's a song, Leora breathed. Eveline nodded. Mother's lullaby. The one I hear at night. Her finger traced the lines. This is how it looks in my mind. The notes have shapes. The melodies have colors. She glanced at Leora, vulnerability raw in her eyes. Does that sound strange? No, Leora said, wondering through her. It sounds extraordinary. Eveline showed her more drawings, pages and pages of musical notation rendered as visual art. She could hear the castle's heartbeat as geometric patterns. The wind through the towers as flowing ribbons. Even emotions. Fear was jagged and sharp. Joy was circular and warm. Grief was spirals that folded inward like collapsing stars. This is what you see? Leora whispered. All the time? Yes. Eveline's voice was small. Father thinks I'm broken because I can't explain it with words. But words feel wrong. They don't have the right shape. Leora pulled the princess into a gentle embrace. And this time, Eveline didn't flinch. You're not broken. You're seeing the world in ways most people never will. Do you understand? You're brilliant. Eveline's arms wrapped around Leora's waist, holding on like she'd been waiting years for permission to do so. That evening, storm clouds gathered over Nightborn Castle like a bruise spreading across the sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air grew thick with the promise of rain. Leora was preparing for bed when she heard the knock. 3 soft taps, the signal she'd taught Eveline. She opened her door to find the princess standing barefoot in her nightgown. Her pale hair wild around her shoulders, her violet eyes wide with fear. Eveline? What's wrong? The child's hand shot out, gripping Leora's with surprising strength. Her whole body trembled. Mother's song, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's crying again, louder than before. It's angry. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the hallway in stark white. Thunder cracked like breaking bone, and beneath it all, Leora heard it, the lullaby, no longer sweet and tender, but wailing, mournful, filled with a grief that had nowhere to go. The storm wasn't just weather, it was haunting. Eveline clutched Leora's hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. She's calling for me. She wants... I don't know what she wants, but it hurts, Leora. It hurts so much. The castle groaned around them as wind battered the walls. Somewhere deep within, glass shattered. Servants cried out in alarm, and the ghostly lullaby rose higher, wrapping around them like reaching fingers, like a mother's love twisted into something desperate and dangerous. We have to find your father, Leora said, pulling Eveline close. Now. They ran through corridors that seemed to twist and writhe like living things. The lullaby grew louder with each step, no longer a whisper but a wail that reverberated through stone and bone. Candles guttered and flared, casting shadows that moved independent of their sources. Servants fled past them, faces pale with terror, clutching crosses and holy water that did nothing against grief made manifest. The ballroom, Eveline gasped, her small hand crushing Leora's. She's there. She's always there. They burst through the massive doors and Leora's breath caught. The ballroom blazed with impossible light, every chandelier ablaze though no one had lit them, crystals chiming like bells as they swayed. But it was the floor that froze her blood. Ghostly figures waltzed in perfect silence. Translucent couples spun across the marble, their forms flickering between solid and vapor. Women in gowns of mist, men in shadow cloaks, all moving to music that existed somewhere between life and death. Their faces were beautiful and terrible, empty eyes, mouths open in silent song, hands clasped in eternal partnership. And at the center of it all, a figure Leora recognized from the portraits, Queen Isolde. She was more substantial than the others, her honey-gold hair flowing as she turned, her pale blue gown trailing starlight. But her face was wrong, twisted with longing so acute it had become agony. Her arms reached outward as she danced alone, searching, always searching. "Mama," Eveline whispered, tears streaming down her face. The ghostly queen's head snapped toward her daughter, and for a moment, something like recognition flickered across her ethereal features. The lullaby swelled, and Leora felt it like pressure against her skull, grief and love and desperate clawing need all tangled together. Eveline stepped forward, pulled by invisible threads. No. Leora grabbed her, but the moment their hands connected, the world tilted. Vision exploded through her mind, a ballroom filled with warmth and laughter. Isolde, alive and glowing, her belly round with child, dancing with Darius beneath blood-red moonlight, his face unguarded, transformed by love. They moved together like water, like breath, like two halves of one soul. The music changing, Isolde's hand going to her stomach, pain flashing across her face, Darius carrying her from the ballroom, servants rushing, healers summoning, a birthing chamber, screams, blood, a baby's first cry piercing the night. Isolde's eyes growing distant, her hand reaching out one last time. She sang, voice fading, a lullaby in a language older than words, a binding, a promise. Let me stay. Let me stay with her. Don't let her be alone. Power surging, uncontrolled, as her mortal life bled away. Her soul fragmenting, one piece slipping into death, another anchoring itself to the child in the cradle, wrapping around her daughter's spirit like a second skin. Darius's roar of anguish shaking the castle stones. The vision released Leora, and she stumbled backward, gasping. Eveline stood rigid, her eyes rolled back, her lips moving in words that weren't hers. Dance with me, my love. Dance with me. I'm so cold. I'm so alone. Dance with me. Eveline! Darius exploded into the ballroom, power rolling off him in waves that made the ghostly dancers scatter like smoke. He seized his daughter, pulling her away from Leora, his crimson eyes wild with terror. What have you done? He snarled at Leora. What have you unleashed? I didn't. She just... Eveline, look at me! Darius gripped his daughter's shoulders, but the child's gaze remained distant, unfocused. The lullaby poured from her throat in Isolde's voice, and the ghost queen drifted closer, reaching with translucent fingers. She's not possessed, Leora said, understanding dawn like a terrible sunrise. Your Majesty, she's connected. Isolde bound herself to Eveline when she died. Part of her soul merged with your daughter's. That's why Eveline perceives things others can't. She's not just sensing the world, she's sensing her mother's emotions, her mother's unfinished song. Darius's face went ashen. No, that can't be. Look at her drawings. Leora pressed. The patterns, the shapes. She's translating what she feels from the other side. She's not broken, she's a bridge. Between life and death, between you and Isolde, between guards. Darius roared. Take the princess to her chambers. Lock the doors. No one enters, no one leaves. She must be contained until I can sever this curse. It's not a curse, Leora shouted, stepping between the king and his daughter. It's a gift. Your wife loved her so much she gave up her own peaceful death to stay connected to her child. And you're so consumed by fear that you can't see. Eveline isn't haunted, my lord. She's reaching for you, through her mother's memory, through these visions. She's trying to show you that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. The ghost of Isolde hovered behind them, her form flickering, her hand extended toward Darius. The lullaby softened, becoming tender again, becoming an invitation. Darius stared at Leora, then at his daughter, still frozen, still singing in a voice not her own. His hands trembled. His immortal composure shattered like glass. I can't lose her, he whispered. If I let this continue, if Isolde takes her fully, she won't, Leora said firmly. Because Isolde doesn't want to take her. She wants to heal her. To heal you both. She turned to Eveline, cupping the child's face gently. Eveline, can you hear me? Come back. Your mother's song is beautiful, but you have your own voice. Come back to us. For a long moment, nothing changed. The ghostly court waltzed on. The lullaby echoed. The storm outside raged. Then Eveline blinked. Her violet eyes focused, first on Leora, then on her father. When she spoke, it was her own small voice, fragile but clear. Mama doesn't want to hurt anyone. She's just lonely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She's been lonely for so long, and no one will dance with her. Not even Papa. The words landed like blows. Darius flinched, his crimson eyes closing in pain. She died because of me, he said hoarsely. I cannot honor that death by pretending she's still here. But she is here, Eveline whispered. Part of her, anyway, in me. I feel her when I'm sad. I hear her when I'm scared. She helps me understand things I shouldn't be able to understand. She looked at her father with ancient eyes. You locked away the ballroom. You forbade dancing. You stopped saying her name. You tried to erase her, but she won't go. Not while I still need her. Not while you still love her. Behind them, Isolde's ghost drifted closer. She reached out, and this time, her translucent hand rested on Darius's shoulder. Barely there, but undeniable. The Vampire King's breath hitched. He felt it. Leora saw the recognition flash across his face. The way his entire body went rigid. The way tears finally, spilled down his marble cheeks. Isolde, he breathed. The lullaby swelled one last time, then faded to silence. The ghostly dancers dissolved like morning mist. The chandeliers dimmed to a soft glow, and in that gentle quiet, Queen Isolde's spirit smiled, sad and loving and complete, before she too began to fade. Not yet, Eveline whispered, reaching for her mother's vanishing form. Please, not yet. But the ghost was already gone, leaving only the faintest impression of warmth and the lingering scent of roses. The ballroom fell silent. Real silence for the first time in 7 years. Darius collapsed to his knees, his composure finally, utterly broken. Eveline stood before him, small and brave, and placed her hand on his cheek. She's still with me, Papa. she said softly. She always will be. But she can't rest until you do. The king pulled his daughter into his arms and wept. The days following the ballroom incident moved like a held breath. Darius retreated into his chambers, emerging only for brief necessary appearances before vanishing again into his self-imposed exile. The court whispered. Some said the king had been cursed, others that he'd finally succumbed to the madness that came with eternal life and mortal love. But Leora knew better. She'd seen his face when Isolde's ghost touched him. That wasn't madness. That was a man finally allowing himself to feel what he'd buried for 7 years. Eveline, meanwhile, had transformed. The connection with her mother's spirit, now understood rather than feared, seemed to have unlocked something within her. She spoke more, moved with greater confidence, and her drawings evolved from abstract patterns into something more deliberate. Choreography. Mama used to dance with Papa every night, Eveline told Leora one afternoon as they sat in the princess's chamber. She traced her finger across a new sketch, figures in motion, lines showing the flow of movement. Before I was born, she said dancing was their language when words weren't enough. Leora studied the drawing, recognition sparking. This is the lullaby, isn't it? The one we keep hearing. Eveline nodded. She made it into a dance, for me, so I could remember her even if I never met her. She looked up at Leora with those haunting violet eyes. Will you help me learn it? Learn what, sweetheart? Mama's dance. The one she never got to teach me. Leora's chest tightened. Your father might not... I know, Eveline interrupted softly. But I need to. I need to understand it completely before... She trailed off, her small hands twisting together. Before the festival of the crimson moon. That's when the veil is thinnest. When she can rest if we let her. And you think dancing will help her rest? I think it will help all of us, Eveline whispered. So they practiced in secret, late at night. When the castle slept and moonlight spilled through the stained glass windows, Leora and Eveline would slip into the ballroom. No music played. Eveline hummed her mother's lullaby, and Leora learned to move with her, following the rhythm only the princess could fully hear. The steps were complex, layered with meaning. A turn represented letting go. A dip symbolized trust. Joined hands meant connection that transcended death. Slowly, painstakingly, they pieced together Isolde's final gift. But secrets in vampire courts never stayed hidden long. It began with whispers in corridors, servants reporting strange sounds from the ballroom at midnight, a guard claiming he saw candlelight flickering in windows that should be dark. The head housekeeper discovered muddy footprints on the polished marble, small prints and larger ones, dancing patterns across the floor. By the third night, the whispers had teeth. The human maid is bewitching the princess. She's teaching her forbidden arts. The king will have her head when he discovers this treachery. Leora heard them but didn't stop. Some acts of love required defiance. It was during a small royal supper, an intimate gathering of the king's inner circle, that everything unraveled. The dining hall was modest by vampire standards. A long table of black wood, silver candelabras casting warm light, goblets of wine dark as blood. Darius sat at the head, his presence subdued, his face carefully blank. Nobles made polite conversation about territorial disputes and trading agreements, their voices a dull hum. Eveline sat near her father, quiet as always, her hands folded in her crimson lap. Leora stood with the other servants along the wall, a statue in uniform, watching. Then, without warning, Eveline stood. The conversation faltered. All eyes turned to the princess as she stepped away from the table, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached the open space between the table and the fireplace, and there she began to turn, softly at first. Just a gentle spin, her hands lifting as though holding invisible partners, then another turn, more assured, her feet finding positions Leora recognized immediately. Isolde's dance. Eveline, Darius said quietly, his knuckles white around his goblet. Sit down. But the princess didn't stop. She hummed, so quietly only those closest could hear, and the lullaby rose from her throat like smoke. The air grew colder. The candles flickered. One of the nobles gasped. Your Majesty, the child is... I said, sit down, Darius commanded, his voice harder. Eveline's eyes remained closed, lost in the rhythm, in her mother's memory. She moved with increasing grace, each step precise, each turn a prayer. Leora's heart was hammered. She knew she should stay silent, invisible, safe. But watching Eveline dance alone, watching her reach for connection in a room full of people who couldn't see her, was unbearable. She stepped forward. The nobles gasped. Darius's head snapped toward her, his crimson eyes blazing. But Leora crossed the floor and took Eveline's outstretched hand, falling into step beside her, following the lullaby only they could fully hear. The room erupted in whispers. The maid dares. Insolent. Your Majesty, this is... Darius stood, his chair scraping violently against stone, his goblet shattered in his grip, wine and glass exploding across the table like blood. You dare? His voice was thunder and ice. You dare desecrate her memory by parading it before the court like entertainment? Leora kept dancing, kept holding Eveline's hand. I'm not desecrating anything, Your Majesty. I'm honoring it. You know nothing of honor. Darius roared. Power rolled off him in waves, making the nobles shrink back, making the candles gutter. This dance was ours, mine and Isolde's. Not yours to steal, not hers to mimic like some... Papa, stop. The words cut through his rage like a blade. Eveline had opened her eyes, and tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. Mama made this for me. Not for you, for me. Her small hand tightened around Leora's. She knew you'd be too sad to teach me, so she hid it in the lullaby, in the patterns, in the way the moonlight moves. Her voice broke. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm trying to get to know her. Darius stared at his daughter, his face a mask of agony. Behind him, the fire in the hearth flared suddenly, and for just a moment, just a breath, a silhouette appeared in the flames. A woman's shape, watching, reaching. The ghostly lullaby swelled through the hall, no longer confined to Eveline's humming. It filled every corner, every shadow, wrapping around them all like a benediction and a plea. Darius flinched as though struck. His hands shook, his carefully constructed walls crumbled, and what lay beneath was raw and bleeding and terrified. I can't, he whispered. I can't watch this. I can't. He turned and fled, his cloak billowing behind him like wings, leaving the dining hall in shocked silence. The nobles sat frozen, their eyes darting between the princess, the maid, and the empty doorway their king had vanished through. The lullaby faded to nothing. The fire dimmed to embers. Leora released Eveline's hand and knelt beside her, pulling the trembling child into her arms. You were so brave, she whispered. Eveline buried her face in Leora's shoulder, her small body shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was muffled but certain. He's afraid to dance. I know, sweetheart. Not because he doesn't remember how. Eveline pulled back, her violet eyes ancient with understanding. Because he remembers perfectly, and remembering hurts more than forgetting. Leora cupped the princess's face gently. Then we'll help him remember that love is worth the pain, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Around them, the nobles began to rise, murmuring amongst themselves, casting dark looks toward Leora. She'd crossed too many lines tonight, defied too many unspoken rules. There would be consequences, but as Eveline's hand slipped into hers, small and trusting, Leora knew she'd do it all. Again, some revolutions began with swords and fire. Others began with a child brave enough to dance in the face of her father's grief, and a maid brave enough to dance beside her. The week before, the festival of the Crimson Moon passed in suffocating tension. Darius retreated into absolute silence, conducting court business through written orders delivered by stone-faced attendants. He didn't summon Leora. He didn't visit Eveline. He became a ghost in his own castle, present but unreachable. The nobles whispered that the king had finally broken, that centuries of immortality and mortal grief had driven him mad. Some called for intervention. Others simply waited, predators sensing wounded prey. Leora was forbidden from the ballroom. Guards stood posted at every entrance, their expressions apologetic but immovable. She was confined to the servants' wing, her every movement watched, her every conversation monitored. But Eveline found ways. Notes slipped under doors. Drawings passed through sympathetic kitchen staff. 3 soft knocks on stone walls in the dead of night. Their signal, transmitted through the castle's bones. The moon rises red in 3 days. Mama's strongest then. We have to be ready. Papa won't come. I know he won't. But I have to try anyway. Don't leave me alone, Leora. Please. On the night of the festival, Leora stood in her small chamber and made a choice. She could obey, stay hidden, stay safe, keep her position and possibly her life. Or she could step into the firelight one more time and stand beside a child who'd already shown more courage than most immortals possessed in eternity. She dressed in her cleanest uniform, pinned her hair with steady hands, and walked toward her fate. The ballroom had been transformed. Crimson silk draped every column, cascading from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls. Thousands of candles burned in iron candelabras, their flames casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. The chandeliers blazed with light that made the crystals sing, and everywhere, on every surface, in every corner, white roses bloomed, their scent heavy and intoxicating. Isolde's favorite flower. The vampire nobility arrived in their finest. Gowns of midnight velvet and blood-dark satin, jewelry that glittered like captured starlight, Faces beautiful and terrible in their ageless perfection. They gathered in clusters, their voices a low murmur, beneath the string quartet's warm-up scales. But all conversations died when the king entered. Darius Nightborn wore mourning, black from throat to heel, a coat of obsidian silk embroidered with silver thorns, boots polished to mirrors, his pale hair bound with a ribbon the color of dried blood. He moved like death itself, silent and inevitable, his crimson eyes dull as burned-out coals. He ascended to the raised platform where the throne sat and turned to face his court. His voice, when he spoke, carried no warmth. The festival of the crimson moon commemorates our founding, our strength, our immortality. His gaze swept the room, touching no one. Tonight we honor tradition. We observe protocol. And we remember that some things, once lost, can never be reclaimed. He gestured to the orchestra. There will be no dancing. The musicians are here for ambiance, nothing more. Let that be understood. The nobles exchanged glances but nodded their acquiescence. The first violin lowered her bow, disappointment flickering across her ancient face. Leora, hidden behind a column near the servants' entrance, felt her heart sink. He was going to do it, going to turn this night of remembrance into another monument to his grief, another 7 years of silence stretching into eternity. Then the ballroom doors opened. Every head turned. Every breath caught. Princess Eveline stood in the doorway, and she was radiant. She wore her mother's gown, the pale blue silk from the portrait, altered to fit her small frame but unmistakable. The bodice glimmered with seed pearls, the skirt flowed like water, and around her shoulders lay a shawl of silver gossamer that caught the candlelight like captured moonbeams. Her blonde hair had been carefully braided with white roses, and in her hands she held a single bloom, perfect, pristine, trembling. She looked exactly like Isolde, exactly like the ghost they'd all seen waltz through these halls. The resemblance was devastating. Darius rose slowly from his throne, his face draining of what little color it held. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles bone-white. "Eveline," he breathed, the word barely audible. "What are you? Why would you?" The princess stepped into the ballroom, her movements careful and deliberate, just as Leora had taught her. She held her head high despite the weight of dozens of immortal gazes, despite the terror that must be screaming through her small body. She walked across that marble floor as though it were a battlefield, and she was the bravest soldier. When she reached the center, the exact spot where her mother's ghost had danced, she stopped. The white rose in her hands began to glow faintly, pulsing with light that seemed to come from within. "Mama wore this dress the night she died," Eveline said, her voice clear and steady. "She was dancing with you, Papa, right here, telling you she loved you in the only language that mattered." "Stop," Darius commanded, but his voice cracked. "Stop this now. She made me a promise before she died," Eveline continued. "She said she'd teach me to dance, even if she couldn't stay. She said love was stronger than death, stronger than silence, stronger than fear." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't waver. "I want to keep her promise, Papa, but I can't do it alone." She extended her small hand toward him, palm up, offering, "Dance with me, Papa." The ballroom went absolutely still. Even the candles seemed to hold their flames. The court watched, transfixed, as the vampire king stared at his daughter's outstretched hand like it was both salvation and damnation. "I can't," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Eveline, I can't." "Yes, you can," she said gently. "You're just afraid." "But Mama's not gone, Papa. She's here. In me. In this dress. In every white rose and every note of her lullaby. She never left." "You just stopped looking." Behind Eveline, the air began to shimmer. The temperature dropped, and slowly, so slowly, a familiar silhouette took shape in the candlelight. Queen Isolde, manifest and glowing, standing behind her daughter like a second shadow. Her translucent hand rested on Eveline's shoulder, and when she smiled, it was full of love and grief and infinite patience. The court gasped. Several nobles stumbled backward. The violinist dropped her bow with a clatter that echoed like thunder. Darius made a sound like something dying. Eveline's hand remained extended, steady despite everything. "One dance, Papa, just one. Let her rest. Let us heal. Please." The vampire king stood frozen on his platform, centuries of control warring with centuries of grief. His crimson eyes locked with his daughter's, so like Isolde's, so full of hope despite everything he'd put her through. Leora held her breath, pressed against her column, tears streaming down her face. The entire supernatural world seemed to pause, waiting for a father to choose. Fear or love, silence or song, death or the possibility of something after. Darius descended from the platform. One step, then another. His legs trembled, his hands shook, but he walked toward his daughter, toward his wife's ghost, toward the music that had died 7 years ago. When he reached Eveline, he stared at her outstretched hand for one more agonizing moment. Then, slowly, reverently, he took it. The ballroom exhaled. Darius's hand closed around Eveline's, and the world shifted. The orchestra, unbidden, lifted their instruments. The first violinist, tears streaming down her ageless face, drew her bow across the strings. The melody that emerged was achingly familiar. Isolde's lullaby, transformed into a waltz, every note heavy with memory and longing. Father and daughter stood facing each other, and for a moment, neither moved. Darius stared down at his child, so small, so brave, wearing her mother's dress and her mother's courage, and something fundamental broke open inside him. "I don't know if I remember how," he whispered. Eveline smiled, gentle and knowing. "Your body remembers, Papa. Just listen." She placed her small hand on his shoulder. He rested his palm against her back, feeling how fragile she was, how mortal. Then together they stepped into the music. The first turn was hesitant, clumsy. Darius moved like a man relearning forgotten language, his body stiff with 7 years of refusal. But Eveline guided him patiently, her feet finding the rhythm, her presence anchoring him to something beyond grief. By the third measure, muscle memory awakened. His movements smoothed. His steps found their old confidence, and as they turned beneath the blazing chandeliers, something miraculous began to happen. Light flooded the ballroom, not from the candles, but from within. It poured from Eveline like water from a breaking dam, cascading across the marble floor in waves of silver and gold. The white roses burst into full bloom, their petals luminescent. The air shimmered with power so ancient and pure, it made even the eldest vampires bow their heads. Isolde's ghost solidified behind them, no longer translucent but radiant, real enough to cast a shadow. She moved with them, her form layering over Eveline's, so that when the princess turned, it was with her mother's grace. When she smiled, it was with Isolde's joy, 2 souls dancing in one body. Past and present, merged. Darius saw it, saw his wife's face superimposed over his daughter's, saw the way Isolde's spirit guided every movement, every breath. His eyes filled with tears that fell like diamonds. "Isolde," he breathed, his voice breaking. "My love, my heart." The ghost smiled through Eveline's eyes. When she spoke, the voice was both, child and queen, living and dead, woven together like harmony. "I never left you, my darling. I've been here, in her, watching you grieve alone. But you were never alone." They spun faster, the music swelling. The court watched in frozen awe as the veil between worlds thinned to gossamer. Other spirits began to manifest at the edges of the room. Ancestors, lost loves, the honored dead, all drawn by the power of this dance, this reunion, this impossible moment of grace. The ballroom transformed into a space between heartbeats, where death had no dominion, and love could not be contained by flesh or time. It was beautiful. It was transcendent. It was killing Eveline. Leora saw it first, the way the princess's steps began to falter, how her breathing grew shallow and labored. The light pouring from her intensified, becoming blinding, and her small body trembled under the weight of containing 2 souls at once. "No," Leora whispered, horror flooding through her. "No, this is too much." Eveline's legs buckled mid-turn. Darius caught her, his euphoria shattering into terror. "Eveline? Eveline, stay with me." But the child's eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. Her lips moved in words that weren't hers. Isolde's voice now dominant, desperate. "Just a little longer. Please, just let me stay a little longer. She's tearing apart." Leora shouted, running forward, breaking every protocol. She grabbed Darius's arm. "Your Majesty, the bond is too strong. Isolde's spirit is anchoring itself through the dance. If you don't stop, she'll pull Eveline through the veil with her." Darius stared at his daughter's flickering form. Solid one moment, translucent the next, caught between worlds. The music continued, relentless, and Isolde's ghost clung tighter. Her love became desperation. Her longing became hunger. "I can stay," the ghost insisted, her voice fracturing. "If we just keep dancing, I can stay." "Mama, no." Eveline's voice broke through, small and fading. "Mama, you have to let go." "I can't lose you again," Darius said hoarsely. But Leora didn't know if he meant his wife or his daughter. Perhaps both. Perhaps that was the trap, being unable to choose between loving the dead and protecting the living. "Your Majesty," Leora said firmly, gripping his shoulder. "Look at your daughter." "Really look." Darius's gaze dropped to Eveline. Her lips had turned blue. Her skin was ice cold. The light around her pulsed erratically, and with each pulse, she seemed to fade a little more. She was dying, being loved to death by a mother who couldn't bear to be separated again. Understanding crashed through him like breaking glass. "No," he whispered. No, I won't. I can't. His arms tightened around Eveline protectively. Isolde, please. Please don't make me choose. The ghost's expression crumpled, her form wavering. I just wanted to hold her just once. I never got to hold her. I know, Darius said, tears streaming freely now. I know, my love. But if you stay, you'll take her with you. And she deserves to live. She deserves the life you sacrificed yourself to give her. The music faltered. The orchestra sensed the shift, their bows slowing. Isolde's ghost looked down at Eveline's fading form, and something changed in her ethereal face. The desperation softened into grief, then grief into acceptance, then acceptance into something like peace. My little star, she whispered, her translucent hand cupping Eveline's cheek. I'm so proud of you. You're so brave, so brilliant, so loved. She looked up at Darius. Take care of her. See her, not me, her. Let her be herself, not my shadow. Darius's breath hitched. I will, I swear it. I swear on everything I am. Then dance with her, my love. Not with my memory. With her. He understood. With shaking arms, he stopped moving. The music ceased. The light began to dim, and Darius Nightborn, vampire king, immortal sovereign, broken widower, whispered the hardest words he'd ever spoken. Goodbye, Isolde. Rest now. Be at peace. The ghost smiled. Radiant, relieved, complete. She leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead, to her husband's lips, soft as morning mist. I love you both, forever and always. Then she dissolved. Not violently, not with grief, but gently, like snow melting in spring sunlight. Her light scattered into 1,000 glowing motes that drifted upward through the vaulted ceiling, passing through stone and into the crimson moon beyond. The veil is sealed. The spirits vanished. The supernatural pressure released, and Eveline collapsed in her father's arms. No, no, please. Darius dropped to his knees, cradling her against his chest. Eveline, breathe. Please breathe. For one terrible moment, nothing. The princess lay motionless, her skin pale as death, her chest still. Then, a gasp. A cough. Her eyes fluttered open, violet and clear and entirely her own. Papa? She whispered. Darius made a sound between a laugh and a sob, pressing his forehead to hers. I'm here, little star. I'm here. Is Mama... She's gone, he said gently. She's at peace now. Because of you. Eveline's small hand came up to touch his wet cheek. Don't be sad. She's happy now. I can't feel her anymore, but I remember. I remember all of it. The dance, her love, everything. That's all we can ask for, Darius whispered. Memory and love. It's enough. It has to be enough. Around them, the ballroom had fallen into profound silence. But this silence was different from what had come before. It wasn't the silence of grief or fear or things left unsaid. It was peaceful, simple, hard-won, blessed peace. The vampire king rose, his daughter cradled in his arms, and for the first time in 7 years, he looked at his court and smiled. Spring came to Nightborn Castle like a whispered promise. The gardens, long neglected, burst into color. White roses climbing the stone walls, lavender spilling over pathways, morning glories opening their throats to drink the dawn. The windows, once shuttered against light and life, now stood open to let in wind that carried the scent of rain and growing things. The castle was waking up. 8 weeks had passed since the festival of the, Crimson Moon. 8 weeks since Isolde's. Spirit found peace. 8 weeks since Darius Nightborn remembered how to be a father instead of a monument to grief. The changes started small. A smile here, a gentle word there. Darius began taking breakfast with his daughter. Quiet meals where they communicated more through gesture than speech, learning each other's rhythms. He commissioned new portraits to hang in the halls. Eveline laughing in the garden, Eveline arranging her wax spirals, Eveline simply being herself, not Isolde's shadow. Just Eveline. But the greatest transformation came on a misty morning when Darius summoned Leora to the throne room. She'd expected punishment. There were still nobles who whispered about the human maid who'd defied protocol, who'd inserted herself into royal affairs, who'd danced when dancing was forbidden. Instead, the king offered her a position. Keeper of the dance, he said, his crimson eyes warm with something that might have been gratitude. The ballroom has been silent too long. It should be filled with music, with movement, with life. Will you help me give it that? Leora, stunned, had accepted. Now, on this particular evening, the ballroom glowed with a different kind of magic. Children filled the space, mortal children from the villages beyond the castle walls. Orphans and misfits, the overlooked and the different, all invited to learn something their world had told them they couldn't master, the language of dance. They ranged from barely walking to nearly grown, and each one moved with their own unique rhythm. Some were graceful, Some clumsy, some needed extra guidance, some needed space, but all were welcome. All were seen. Leora moved among them in a simple dress of dove gray, her hair loose around her shoulders, her hands patient as she demonstrated steps and caught those who stumbled. She'd discovered that she had a gift for this, for meeting people where they were, for finding the music hidden in every soul. And at the center of it all was Eveline. The princess wore a gown of soft lavender, her blonde hair braided with fresh flowers. She'd grown in these past weeks, not taller, but brighter, more present. She still didn't speak much, still needed her patterns and her quiet spaces, still experienced the world in ways others couldn't quite understand. But now she moved among the children with confidence, showing them hand positions, demonstrating turns, offering encouragement through gestures and gentle touches. When words failed her, she drew pictures, spiral patterns that became dance steps, shapes that became songs. The children adored her. To them, she wasn't a cursed princess or a silent heir. She was simply Eveline, someone who understood what it meant to be different, to need the world to meet you halfway. A small boy with a twisted foot approached her shyly, tears in his eyes. "I can't dance like the others," he whispered. "My leg won't let me." Eveline knelt beside him, her violet eyes thoughtful. She took his hands and began to sway, not stepping, just moving to the music. When he looked confused, she smiled and said softly, "Dancing isn't about your feet. It's about your heart. Show me what your heart wants to do." The boy closed his eyes and swayed with her, his movements small but genuine. When he opened them again, he was beaming. Leora watched from across the room, tears pricking her eyes. Darius watched too. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, no longer on his throne but among his people, dressed not in formal regalia, but in simple black and silver. He'd been attending these gatherings every week, at first as distant observer, then gradually stepping closer, until tonight. Tonight he'd helped a young girl with her curtsy, steadying her when she wobbled. The court had been scandalized. The king touching common children, teaching them as though he were a mere instructor. But Darius no longer cared what his court thought. He cared about the light in his daughter's eyes. He cared about the laughter echoing in halls that had been silent too long. He cared about honoring his wife's memory not by preserving grief, but by creating joy. As the evening wound down and the children were escorted back to their homes by patient servants, Darius made his way to the center of the ballroom. He raised his hand, and the remaining guests fell quiet. "For centuries, this castle has been a place of shadows," he said, his voice carrying easily through the space. "A monument to power, to control, to the belief that strength meant never showing weakness. But I have learned," his gaze found Eveline, then Leora, "I have been taught, by two very brave souls, that true strength lies in vulnerability, in connection, in allowing ourselves to be changed by love." He gestured to the ballroom around them. "This space was cursed by silence for 7 years. No more. From this night forward, let it be known that once each season, the doors of Nightborne Castle will open. Children from all lands are welcome to learn, to dance, to be seen and celebrated exactly as they are." A murmur of approval rippled through the remaining crowd. "This tradition will be called the Moonlit Waltz," Darius continued, "in honor of Queen Isolde, who taught me that love transcends death, in honor of Princess Eveline, who taught me that differences are gifts, not curses, and in honor of Leora Vale," his eyes met hers, "who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is refuse to let others suffer alone." Leora felt her cheeks flush as the crowd applauded. Eveline ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. As the gathering dispersed and the candles burned low, 3 figures remained in the ballroom: a king, a princess, and a maid who'd become so much more than that. Moonlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floor in shades of silver and sapphire and rose. The air smelled of white roses and possibility. Eveline tugged on Leora's sleeve, her violet eyes bright with mischief and affection. "Dance with me," she whispered. Leora smiled, warmth flooding her chest. "Always." She took the princess's hand, and together they stepped into the silver light. Their movements were simple, unhurried, a gentle waltz that asked nothing but presence, that required no perfection, only willingness to move together. Darius watched for a moment. Then, with a smile that would have shocked his court, he joined them. He took Eveline's other hand, completing the circle, and the 3 of them turned together beneath the chandeliers. No ghosts this time, no supernatural manifestations, just a father learning to be present, a child learning to trust, and a woman who'd chosen compassion over fear. Their shadows merged on the marble floor, 3 becoming one in the moonlight, spinning in slow, peaceful circles. They danced not as king and servant, or parent and child, or mortal and immortal, They danced as souls who'd walked through darkness and chosen, again and again, to step toward the light. And as the music of the universe hummed around them, in the wind through the windows, the distant night birds, the very stones of the castle singing, they were, all of them, finally unafraid of silence, because they'd learned that silence, when shared with those you love, isn't emptiness, it's peaceful.